Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the third weekend release of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, the brand new release from Disney, Strange World, ending up as a massive flop, likely to lose Disney close to $200 million when everything is said and done. We also had the new release Devotion, which is a new Korean war film, not doing all that well based off of its budget especially, and we also had the second weekend numbers for The Menu, She Said, and the premiere of the Netflix film Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery. That's right, Rian Johnson back at the box office, everybody, and everyone's going gaga over his per theater numbers. However, I'm not impressed, and I will explain why in just a few seconds. Before we go any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure you smash the rumble button as well with the notification bell turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So, of course, the big news is Black Panther Wakanda Forever made $45.9 million this weekend. This is in addition to the amount of money it made over Thanksgiving proper. Very, very well. Again, this film doing very well, 31% hold in its third week of release. And so you add to that a pretty normal 63% drop from week 1 to week 2, and even more impressive, and very impressive rather, Black Panther Wakanda Forever drop of 31%. That is really good news for this movie. There's just no other way around it. I've been saying this for a long time now, that the domestic number is something that I think a lot of people are going to end up sleeping on. As you can see, the per theater ratio here, $10,000 per theater, very, very strong. Even though it was dropped from 138 screens, the film still getting up to $367 million domestically. Easily going to pass $400 million. The chance is just how close to $500 million does this film get domestically. I think that it has a good chance of getting there, that there's a pathway for that film to get there, and I'll explain why, especially when in comparison to another film from Marvel that came out this year, which is Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which this film has now officially passed, and not just passed, but is doing so much better, is the reason why I think that $500 million is absolutely within the is absolutely within spitting distance for the final domestic total for Black Panther Wakanda Forever. For Strange World, though, it's a very different story because this film cost $180 million, and at $11.9 million domestically and not much else internationally, yeah, this movie coming out over 4,000 screens, not doing well at all. In fact, based off of the numbers and metrics that we have in front of us, it looks like this film is going to be yet another massive financial failure for them. Very similar to the numbers we saw from Lightyear, which was also a massive financial failure for Disney. Strange World is having the same thing. The issue and the difference is that Lightyear should have been a success. That film should not have flopped. Whereas this movie, this really had flop written all over because it was a film that they didn't really market all that well, right? The marketing that they did do for this film really wasn't all that effective. I still have not seen a trailer for this film, so I still have no idea what it's about. You add on top of that the talk and conversation about how they are pushing these characters, pushing LGBTQ+, I play whatever, again, the acronym is now, I don't care, just they keep adding random things and just making things up as they go, it seems. But regardless of any of that, the film just didn't seem like it was going to do all that well, even regardless of any of that, right? Even if that wasn't a part of the story, the fact is that this is a film that is featuring a brand new, innovative, or rather a brand new original, somewhat original story coming out over Thanksgiving weekend up against the third weekend of Black Panther. It's almost as if Disney wanted this film to do poorly, or rather, what I personally think is the truth. They knew this film was not going to be successful, so instead of putting it out on a weekend by itself to maybe give it the best chance of at least being the #1 film at the box office, they said, hey, might as well release it over Thanksgiving, where most people are out of school. That way we can try and make some money off of this, because ultimately it is going to be a pretty massive financial loss for the company. And yeah, let's just say that I hope that worked out for you, because if you still think $200 million is worth it, is worth not just maybe hanging on to the movie and waiting for another time to release it, I don't exactly understand their practice here. I don't quite understand what they're thinking about doing. But yeah, not looking good for Disney in the long term for this movie. We also had Devotion coming out as well. I don't know why they have it in this way where it's not in the correct order. There we go. Let me try and get that there. Now we go. So Glass Onion, the Knives Out sequel from Rian Johnson, our good friend Rian Johnson, made $9.2 million at over almost 700 screens. And the reason why that's impressive, right, I will give credit where credit's due, it made $13,000 per screen. So the showings where this movie was did very, very well. The issue for Netflix, though, is I believe the reporting was that they spent around $400 million to buy Rian Johnson, essentially, for 2 films, to buy him for 2 films, and yet, based off of at least some reporting, this film only cost around $40 million to make, which is totally believable because this is definitely a lower budget type movie. But the fact that they spent as much money as they did to get exclusive rights to this film, $400 million, they only spent $40 million, or Rian Johnson only had to spend $40 million to actually make the movie, and then they're releasing it for a week in theaters as a preview before it goes onto Netflix behind the paywall. This just does not make any sense to me because I still don't quite understand how these streaming studios account for their films being financial successes, because you don't have the typical standards like you have with the box office numbers here. So even though that $13 million domestically is impressive for what the film is and how few screens it actually released into, it still has to be said that as far as Netflix's, end game here, there really isn't a whole lot of sense to it, because there was also reporting that the film, or rather that Netflix, basically rented this movie out for very, very cheap as well, offering up to basically a 60% return to the theaters, which is very rare for a brand new release. Basically, the studio only getting around 40% of the returns, so a very, very small rental fee, to say the very least. And so, again, is it to try to get more people to go see the movie, to have it up for awards contention, so it has to have a theatrical release of some kind in some way to make it easier for award contention? I don't really know. I've heard very mixed things about this from the people who have gotten to see it early. I wasn't a big fan of the first one in the first place, so I have a feeling that this film is probably not going to really be high up on my list of favorite movies of the year, but it's just kind of a conundrum. I really don't understand what they are thinking when it comes to the way that they're pushing this movie out, because based off of this number, it looks like they would have been smarter to have this film be released for about a month at least in theaters, maybe be able to make their money back with the $40 million in production budget, or at the very least be able to make some return on their investments. Again, $400 million for 2 movies. I know that first film did very, very well, but when you don't have box office returns to match what you've put into the film, I don't understand what they are doing. Anyway, coming in the number 4 spot is a film from Sony called Devotion. This is a Korean War movie. This film did not do well at all domestically. It opened up to $6 million for a $90 million budgeted film. Not a good start. The Menu coming in at $5.2 million, a 42% drop in the second week of its release. As you can see, even though that is a decent hold for this movie, because of it being a smaller budget film, it really should have done better than this. And unless it has stronger holds than this in the weeks ahead, the chances of it making its money back is not likely. It's possible, right? It could definitely outperform things. We saw this happen with Where the Crawdads Sing, where it didn't start off all that impressive, but it kept holding and holding and holding because of good word of mouth. I've heard some pretty good things about the film as being a good dark comedy. So whether or not that good word of mouth is going to be able to push this film to be able to do better than expectations is anyone's guess, but at least as far as what I'm seeing in front of me and what most films do historically, the film's looking like it'll be a box office flop. Black Adam, speaking of flops, even though it's only dropped 27% in the 6th week of its release, likely because people were going to see it over Thanksgiving and the Thanksgiving holiday, is being dropped by Warner Brothers from over 700 screens and is still over $70 million in the red. There's just no real chance of this film being able to make its money back, and the film wasn't all that good, so can't say I'm that sorry and that sad about it. Universal saw a massive increase in revenue for The Fabelmans, but still having a very small release for this movie. So again, I don't quite understand whenever they do things like this, whenever they do the smaller independent releases. I guess it's to try to make it look better. And like when they say, hey, look, the per theater ratio is pretty good versus getting a wider release opening right in all the locations at once and then having a very subpar performance. I guess that might be a reason why Universal's doing it. But regardless of that, it's hard for me to track this just because of that very fact. Technically, it's been out for 3 weeks, but since it's not following the typical release pattern, I can't really do much tracking on it, at least at this point in time. Bones and All is another film from United Artists, which is in the second week of the release. It added another 2,700 screens, so really its official opening weekend, I guess you could say, making $2.2 million, bringing its total to $3.7. Really, again, not all that impressive per theater numbers there. It's apparently a romantic film about cannibals, so kind of lost me at that point. Ticket to Paradise, $1.8 million, still hanging around, still made its money back, but again, it's as far as the actual profits are concerned, not all that impressive. And then right now, at the very least, as far as the films that are being reported, She Said coming in the number 10 spot, that bottom spot there, 50% drop in its second week of release. This film expected to be a flop, which makes me very, very happy. Now let's go ahead and look into those Black Panther numbers. So as you can see, 675.5 million is the worldwide total. Now, some people may have checked the site earlier and saw the error that I did, which was they had said the international box office was over 600 million. I wonder how many people actually fell for that and actually believe that this film had made over $1 billion already. Because if you were one of those persons, shame on you. Shame on you. Anyway, with that being said, $675.5 million worldwide is actually really, really good. I thought the film would be a little bit closer to $700 million. And what that tells me is that internationally, it's not going to be performing nearly as well as what we are seeing domestically. And that's something that really isn't that much of a surprise, right? Domestically, this film was always going to be a much stronger performer. This film, as I said, is going to, don't sleep on the domestic totals for this movie. Whereas internationally, it looked like it's going to perform about as well as a film can, based off of its initial starts in various networks. I would not be surprised if the film gets pretty close to $400 million internationally by the end of its release, but getting close to $500 million domestically. Again, how close does it get to both of those? 500 for the domestic, 400 for the international. How close does it get to that is what's going to determine whether it gets to $850 million or upwards of $900 to $950 million. Again, it's kind of like a ceiling point. Some people are still saying it's going to make $1 billion. The numbers just really aren't tracking for that at this point in time. It's doing well, but it only added about another $30 million internationally. And so because you are still seeing consistent drops, likely next weekend to see another 20 million or so coming maybe from the international markets. Maybe there's some places hasn't opened yet and might get a little bit of extra cash there too. But the chance of it getting to $1 billion, it's just not really in the cards. Again, the fact that it's going to get maybe to $500 million domestically, maybe. And again, I think that has a good chance of doing so. It would have to get to $500 million internationally, and I just don't see that being a possibility at this point in time, based on the numbers and based on the historical tracking, comparing it to other films, including even comparing it to other films like Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness. As you can see, the film will easily pass the domestic of Doctor Strange probably by the end of next weekend, and that's the reason why I suspect the film will get close to $500 million, because by the end of its release, Doctor Strange had made $411 million. If you look at the current release schedule, as you can see, this film, Wakanda Forever, is at $367.6 million versus the $342 at the same point in its release that this was. Now, as you can see, that $367 will hold this film above it. Even if they didn't add a single dollar left, this film would be above Doctor Strange, even going into the next Saturday release. And so, because this film is going to continue to do well in this, this coming week after this post-Thanksgiving weekend, and I still do think we're going to see a pretty massive drop-off in the fourth week of release, because it'll be the non-holiday numbers, right? So, okay, how much can this actually stand up in a pretty, normal weekend in comparison to the holiday weekend? We'll have to wait and see. Do I still think it's going to be able to stay above where Doctor Strange was? I think easily. And so because it is now about 20 million or so above where Doctor Strange was, based off of that percentage, that's the reason why I'm thinking, okay, even if it just ends with a $20 million advantage, you're looking at the film still being closer to $450 million. But I think it's going to be a little bit more than that percentage-wise, and so that's why 450 to 500 domestically is a possibility. Whereas if you look at that 307.9 international total to the 540 that was made by Doctor Strange, there's a much wider gap there, and I just don't see that actually being able to catch it up, which is why I would say $400 million internationally makes a little bit more sense, which is why 900 to 950 is the cap for this movie. Anyone saying anything other at this point in time, you don't have the numbers to back you up. You might one day have those numbers, but right now, the numbers aren't there. Different story for Strange World, where $27.8 million worldwide out of a $180 million budget means this film is going to be a massive financial flop. Same thing can be said for Devotion, which only brought in $9 million domestically. Glass Onion, as I said, $40 million was the reported budget for the movie, but based on the fact that they paid $400 million for the rights to this movie, and they're not even going to be able to make that back in the theaters, let alone on their streaming service, I don't really understand any of their decisions for that. I mean, don't get me wrong, the first film did do well at the box office, but when you don't have a box office, it's harder to make that argument. The Menu at $33.4 million, even though it is tracking towards the higher end historically, as I had mentioned, this film costs a little bit too much for its own good, and still needs to have a pretty strong hold for the rest of its release if it has any chance of breaking even. Black Adam, again, speaking of films that won't break even, Black Adam still, only adding a few million dollars here. Maybe it maxes, maybe it is able to max out around $400 million at best, but getting that much more than that, not likely. It's not going to get anywhere close to the amount of money it needed to break even, and the film wasn't all that great, so can't say I'm too sad about that. The Fablemans, again, I'll just put the number up here so that way people can see it, but I'm not really tracking this film at this point in time. Same can be said for Bones and All at $5.8 million. Don't really have that much interest in in Cannibals. Apparently Mark Rylance is in the film. I like Mark Rylance, but it's also a Timothée Chalamet movie, and he's a bit hit or miss depending on the film that he's in. Ticket to Paradise, $165 million. This film's pretty much stopped making money, but it had a pretty strong showing for this movie internationally before it got domestic release and was able to make a little bit of profit. She said, set to be a massive flop. Lyle Crocodile continuing to hang around. I know that I mention this film every so often, and so it's still making money. And again, it's off the charts, even tracking wise, based historical. It's doing better than what it probably should at this point. It just doesn't seem like there's going to be enough there to make its money back. $215.6 million. Speaking of films that did way above the charts, Smile continuing to make a little bit of extra money. Pray for the Devil, still no budget on it, so can't speak about it really. And then The Woman King, did add at least a couple $1 million, but yeah, still looking like that's going to be a flop. Going to the actual box office charting, because we all love doing charting here on the channel. As you can see, Strange World, right, with a $180 million budget based off of typical marketing costs and typical returns on investment. At $27.8 million, the film is currently at $253.3 million in the red. So even if this film has a incredibly insane drop-off next weekend, meaning it holds very well next weekend, the chances of the film making its money back just aren't existent at this point in time. I think something similar can be said for Devotion as well, making $9 million worldwide in its opening. Again, no international numbers to speak of, so that's just from the domestic. With a $90 million budget, it means that $129.5 million in the red is the number it's currently looking at. The Menu is currently at $52 million. Sorry, that's actually a number... Sorry, looking at the wrong number there. Glass Onion, Knives Out 2, is currently looking at $52 million in the red. And based on the fact that it's only getting a limited theatrical release, yeah, I don't quite understand what they were thinking. Again, maybe to get positive word of mouth, maybe to get some type of awards contention. I mean, I'm pretty sure the Oscars are now allowing films that don't have a massive theatrical release to be able to, we saw that happen last year where there was an Apple TV movie that got a lot of awards consideration, right? So I just don't understand their methodology here, because it's not likely to add that much more to this number. And so even based off of the production budget, let alone the $400 million they spent on Rian Johnson to get two of these movies, I just don't quite get it. Going into the actual breakdown of what I'm projecting for the Menu at $33.4 million this week means I'm projecting it to get somewhere between 47 and 66 when all is said and done based on historical standards. And based on the $45 million budget, the $75 million break-even point, it means I suspect the film to lose somewhere between 4 and 16 million. Now, this film could end up pulling out something similar as to what we saw with Where the Crawdads Sing, where it continued to do well week after week after week domestically, and it might be able to just make enough to even get past this point, but we'll have to wait and see. That's a long-term game, and at this point, it's not looking like that will be the case, but you never know. She said not nearly as in good of a position at $42.5 million to $40 million in the red. This is the film that's all about the Me Too movement, so can't say I'm all that surprised by that. Now remember, for Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I was projecting the film to make somewhere between $92.5 million and $279.5 million in net gain profit. At this point, as of today, this film has broken even. At $675, it is now $30.3 million in the black. That means that this film is well on its way to being able to make much more than what we saw for Thor: Love and Thunder. Thor: Love and Thunder ended up around $750 million worldwide, made around $50 million in profits. We're looking at this movie doing much better than that. And so it's because of that number, and it's because of what we're seeing here, that I suspect $100 million is absolutely in the ballpark for where this film ends up. And again, is that as impressive as the first film? No. And we can absolutely talk about how there's been a massive drop-off in the audience of the MCU, especially over the last year. But the fact that this movie is probably going to fall somewhere between Thor: Love and Thunder and also that of Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness tells us that there are still enough MCU stans and still enough general audiences who support these movies for them to continue to be financially successful. And so until that starts to change and drop, which I think might start to happen next year, where it might be a little bit more obvious, the fact that it's already being shown in Disney, which used to be a standard bearer when it came to the animated films, right? Strange World, the fact that that film's going to likely lose over $200 million when all is said and done, shows us that Disney is a far cry from the company that it once was, far cry from the box office juggernaut that it once was also, but we can't let that, and again, as true as that is, we can't let that distract us away from the fact in front of us that is Black Panther doing much better domestically than what many people had considered, and that the film is indeed a box office success, a box office hit, one could even say at this point. But anyway, what are y'all's thoughts about these numbers? Do you think Black Panther's going to end between, what side of 850 to 950 do you think it's going to be? As I said, it really can't make much less unless it has a massive drop-off. Can't really make much less than $850 million, I would say, by the end of its run. And it can't really get over 950 million versus at the end of its run. And again, I know some people are in the comment section saying it might make $1 billion. Again, please show me where you're seeing that number being a possibility, specifically internationally, right? Domestically, I think $500 million is absolutely within the cards for this movie. But to say that the film is going to get to $500 million internationally, at least at this point, just does not seem very likely based off of the numbers that we have in front of us. And so I would love to be shown exactly where that could possibly happen. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Also, Strange World, what are your thoughts? Again, I don't think this film is failing because of it being quote unquote woke. I think it's more about the marketing and the fact that Disney clearly threw this film out to the wolves knowing that it would fail to try to make at least some money back, even though it's ultimately not going to really be worth it in the long run, I would say. Let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If that's video, smash that like button, light the fire button, honestly, and smash the rumble button. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your first Sunday of Advent. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Blessed Sunday. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my November Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Patreon with Father Luca Illich. Thank you very much, Father. Garrett Searles, Jaimir Irie Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Laura, The Modern Major General Story, Orange Hat Reviews, who you can check out on YouTube at his channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Rosetta Allen, who also has a YouTube channel that you can check out at Eagle Writer, and Miss Martin Muses, who also has a YouTube channel, Miss Martin Muses, and of course the amazing Empress of the Universe, Tina B, who you can check out at her YouTube channel, Tina B, where she hosts the show with Stephanie B, one of my mods, and one of my Valkyrie, called Soup to Nuts. Check out Soup to Nuts, and it premieres pretty much every Friday. So again, shout out to all of my Patreon people, also to all my Subscribe Star people, starting off with Matt317. Check him out on Twitch at Matt317. The R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. And ZK-Man you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co to follow him as he starts his podcast and also for many of his musical musings as well. Check him out. Very, very talented guy. And then lastly, my locals peeps. We got Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan. How about a hockey player? UAB Mad Dog, Mike Jackson for the win. J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. Thank you all so very much for supporting me. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to special things like giveaways and also exclusive podcasts that I do with John the Flickinger and other guests throughout the month of November and in the previous and the months to follow as well. And again, if any of that sounds interesting to you, especially the 4K giveaways, Steelbook giveaways, some of them that I have to give away this month are films like Starship Troopers on 4K Steelbook, Top Gun Maverick on 4K Steelbook, amongst many others. If that sounds interesting to you, check out the link and follow the instructions down below. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.